Number 1.
Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced them, namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the US's largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school, being so small, with only 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation, and we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning, but this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, which we called the Big Blue. We were headed out and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered the reservation. By this time, everyone was asleep with it being about 2 in the morning, and when we had crossed the reservation's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit, and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles an hour. As the bus got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy crap, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The skinwalker then just smiled at me with this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked yellow and pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over the skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and then it ran off back into the desert out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear that they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next school day in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feather scepter-like thing, turned around and got in his truck and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another skinwalker. It might be due to the fact that I moved away from the town and reservation, and if I do have to go south, I go around, way around.
Number 2.
I started renting a place out in rural Maryland back in March. It's enough space for me and my dogs. It's not far from work, a less than 15-minute drive from the garage. No, I'm not a mechanic, just a receptionist. But that's not important. What's important for you to know is that it's just me and my 2 dogs for about 20 miles in either direction. Unused on either side of me, a cornfield across the road, and woods about 200 feet behind me. I'm not used to this. I lived in a Baltimore row house until college, and then I lived in an inner city apartment with roommates. And now I live here. It's just me. It's my dream house, you know. a big backyard, a front porch with a swing, and it's rent to own. 2 years and my rent becomes a mortgage. Now though, now I'm having regrets. It started out a couple of weeks ago. I got home around 7 PM, which is normal for a weeknight. The dogs were barking up a storm, so loud I could hear them as I turned into the driveway. Also normal. This is until I noticed they weren't at the front door barking for me. They were at the screen door that leads to the backyard. I put my purse down and went to see what had them so distracted. I figured it was a squirrel, maybe a deer, even a bobcat was a possibility. Nothing. There was nothing. But they kept barking, even after I knelt down and tried to get their attention. After 5 or so minutes they stopped, finally noticing that I was there, and started climbing all over me like any other day. I laughed and played with them for a few minutes, and blew it off as nothing. Just dogs being dogs. A couple of days passed with no strange behavior from the dogs. Then, the Sunday night before last, around 3 AM, I was woke up to them barking a ruckus. They were at the screen door again, barking at something. This time, it really was something. At the time, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It was so dark outside, and whatever it was, somehow, it was darker. A shadow, I'd say no taller than myself at about 5'9", based on the trees, was emerging from the woods at the edge of my backyard. It wasn't really shaped like a person, but it wasn't shaped like an animal. It was just a mess. It came about 20 feet out of the woods, stayed still for what seemed like forever. Then before I knew it was gone. The dogs quieted down and pawed at me to be played with. I looked up at the clock and it was 4 AM. I played with them for a minute, then calmed them down and went back to bed. I stared at the ceiling trying to make sense of things. Eventually, I fell asleep. I called in sick to work last Monday, too distracted for the night before. Early in the morning, I hooked the dogs up to the tie-out and walked back towards the woods. Nothing. No signs of anything being back there last night. Maybe it was all in my head, or a dream. I wish that was what it was. I went in and made some coffee and drank it in the yard, watching the dogs roll around in the grass. Nothing happened again, until the other day, Tuesday. I came home from work to them barking at the backyard, like the first time, but this time it was actually at something. The shadowy mass was maybe 10 feet from the screen door. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there, almost opaque, with no real shape to itself. I looked down at the dogs and they suddenly stopped barking. I looked up and the thing was gone. I'm not sure what this was. It may not even be dangerous. I'm in my room with the dogs now, and all I know is there was something outside. Perhaps a skinwalker. For half an hour now, the dogs have been barking at my bedroom door. But it'll go away this time too, right?
Number 3.
So, I lived in my parents' rental house near my school. It was kind of an intermediate form of living on my own. All the perks, not as many responsibilities. They want me to worry about school rather than bills, is how they put it. I still have a part-time job for groceries and other various stuff I want though. The night it happened, I'd come home to a crazy dog. Vinny, my big black Briard, was going absolutely bonkers. He was jumping up on me, which he never does, and barely let me get to the counter to set down my takeout. I figured he was out of water or excited for dinner. It was close to dinner time, and I paused to scruff him and calm him down, but he just kept pounding around like he wanted to tell me something. I filled his bowl and took my Thai food to the couch. I then put on reruns of Archer and settled in. I had a paper to write, but I was putting it off for a while. It was for my American film as literature class, which was important to my comparative literature major,
but I wasn't thrilled to write a paper on native son, so it was probably going to be a late night for me as I was inevitably going to put it off until late. Vinny came pounding into the living room and stood in front of the television. I stared at him for a moment as he panted furiously and started barking at me. I was quick to hush him because he has a big bark, and we had neighbors, but he kept stalking around the living room, making various dog noises, whining and pawing at the carpet. I put my Radner down and went to give him more food just to shut him up, but his bowl was untouched. He never left so much as a kibble behind, and I became very apprehensive. He was acting like something was wrong, and he wasn't a drama queen, so I made sure all the doors were locked and turned on some lights. "Go outside, Vinny," I said, sitting back down on the couch. He whined at me and bowed, then bounced, and I had to get up and pull him back by his collar to the dog door to the backyard. He shot me a look, but climbed through and sighed, still a bit concerned, but not overly so. I went back to the living room and resumed my dinner. After a good 5 episodes or so, I got enough inspiration to go into the computer room and start writing my paper. There was a thump from outside as I sat down, but I ignored it. Vinny could get crazy sometimes and bounce all over the place, so I directed my attention to my homework and slowly got going. I've been going for an hour or so when I heard another thump and something drag along the side of the house. I furrowed my brow and tried to concentrate on my paper, but something felt off. Vinny started barking and I rushed to the door to get him to come in. He was growling, hackles fully up, and I could barely get him back inside. I locked the dog door and tried to walk him away, but he just sat there staring at it, still growling. I cautiously grabbed his collar and opened the door. The yard looked normal, kind of sickly in the outdoor light, but otherwise just fine. Vinny jerked against me and it took all I had to keep control of him. He started barking again, and I'd had enough. We were going inside for the night. I made sure all the doors were locked and the garage was closed. Something was definitely off, and I finally decided to call the cops on the non-emergency number. "Hi, my dog is acting really weird and I've heard some noises outside. Is there any way you could have someone drive by my house?" I asked. "Of course," the woman said. "What's your address?" I told her my address and thanked her profusely. Vinny was still acting like a nutcase, but I didn't want him outside anymore. I felt better with him going crazy inside, where he could protect me. Vinny is a big dog, fiercely protective, and really scary when he wants to be. I had a boyfriend that tried to hit me once, and Vinny nearly bit his arm off. He may have been acting like a maniac, but if something happened, he'd have my back. There was a knock on the door, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Vinny started barking his head off, and I grabbed his collar again so I could open the door. 2 policemen stood on my porch.
"We just wanted to let you know that everything looks good from the street,"
the first said, looking a bit nervous as I held the bouncing, growling beast by the collar.
"Did you want us to check around the back for you?"
"Oh my gosh, would you?" I asked, relieved. "That would be wonderful, right through here," I said, showing them the back door. They went out and walked around the lawn for a few minutes, and then came back in.
"It doesn't look like anything's amiss,"
the other cop said.
"But we'll drive by later."
"Thank you, I really appreciate it," I said, showing them out. "Thanks again." I locked the door and let go of Vinny's collar. He ran into the other room to bark at the dog door again. Part of me wanted to unlock it, but something told me not to. I finally had enough and put him in the laundry room with his bed and toys, hoping he'd just lie down and go to sleep, but he just kept barking and howling. It was muffled now though, which made it easier to concentrate on my homework. After what seemed like hours, I clicked the double space option and exhaled proudly just barely making the page number requirement. That served some ice cream for sure. I let Vinny out and scooped myself a bowl and made my way upstairs to get ready for bed. Vinny actually comes up with me and sleeps in my bed, but he stood at the bottom of the stairs, whining and giving me little barks. I called him, but he just stood there, panting. I was really unnerved, but let my door open so he could come to bed when he calmed down. I ate my ice cream and read a few chapters in my book, then snuggled in for the night. I don't think I'd even fallen asleep when Venny just went nuts downstairs. I was out of bed in a flash. He sounded like he was dying or something. On my way downstairs, I heard a loud clatter and a high-pitched scream from Vinny. I found him growling, barking, whining, and snarling in the kitchen doorway, fixated on something. I ran to his side to calm him down, and that's when I saw it. The dog door was halfway across the kitchen, lying limp on the tile, and something was trying to come in through the hole. The thing was, it was somewhere in between one of those grey aliens and a corpse. It had one shoulder and a long, oddly jointed arm, clawing at the floor as it struggled to get its other shoulder through. Its skin was somewhere between pale blue and mold green, like dead flesh. The hand that was clawing at the kitchen floor was too long, like it had extra joints on its fingers or something, which were tipped with ugly little black claws instead of fingernails. Its face was stretched, its jaw hanging lower than it should in a mewling, growling, angry moan. It didn't seem to have eyes, just sunken black empty sockets. It started to wiggle its other shoulder through the hole, and I didn't need to see more. I pulled Vin into the garage, not bothering with shoes or putting on pants. I sped to my parents' house, running a few red lights along the way. I told my parents what had happened, but they didn't believe me, obviously. They did comment on how agitated Vinny was, though. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and I didn't go to school the next morning, opting to play sick and cuddle with Vinny all day. He'd calmed down, and that alone made me feel safe. When my parents went to the rental house, they found the dog door halfway across the kitchen floor, and half of the backyard torn up. Claw marks were dug into the floor by the door, which they blamed on Vinny, but agreed that the situation was weird. I moved back into my parents' house and insisted that they come with me to pack up my stuff. I wouldn't stay past dark either. It's all I can do to stay in school. I'm getting Vinny licensed as a therapy dog so he can come with me anywhere I go. I don't think anything like what happened that night will ever happen again, but if it does, Vinny has my back.
Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader here. I hope you enjoyed listening through that. If you did, please slap a like, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe to be notified of future uploads? If you have a story you want me to narrate, please send it to my email in the description box. Once again, thanks a lot for listening.
Had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, which we called the Big Blue. We were headed out and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered the reservation. By this time, everyone was asleep with it being about 2 in the morning, and when we had crossed the reservation's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus staring out and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The Skinwalker then just smiled at me with this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked yellow and pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The Skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform.
Number 1.
Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced them, namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute reservation to the north and the US is across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles an hour. As the bus got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy crap, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road, largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school, being so small, with only 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation, and we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning, but this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We